Cool.
So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today for horrornews.net. And you are the incomparable composer, Christopher Thomas. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get started?
Well, yeah, I am a composer. Primarily, I work in film, television, but the last 10 years, I do a whole lot of work in theme parks too. And yeah, music is something I was born into. I come from a very musical family. They weren't the kind of people that try to chase me out of music and make me be a doctor like a smart person. They just let me be creative, and we're always supportive of that. So I came from a very musical background and had always intended on being a composer for film and TV, and all the other stuff like writing music for concert halls and theme parks was just a surprise that happened along the way.
That's fascinating about the theme parks. I don't think I knew that because I was reading a little bit of information about you because I know you just recently you did Haymaker, the
Mhm.
film. You composed for that incredible film. But what do you do with the theme parks? That is very fascinating.
Yeah, it's not unlike scoring a film, except it's a little bit looser than film scoring. And film production moves at such a fast pace that you're just physically trying to keep up with delivering the right amount of music every day just to make it to the end. Where theme parks, they operate on really large time scales. And you get a little more creative time to just think things over and play around. And it's more of a laboratory environment than it is a high stress, get it done fast sort of world. And, we're hitting marks as you're going through a ride. There's an ascent, a plateau, a descent. And I know from the schematics and the design just how long each of those moments are. And you can be precise within like a second, which is an eternity of space compared to film, where you're trying to hit one frame, being that there's 24 frames every 1 second. You may have to hit a mark at 5 minutes 17 seconds in 12 frames, right? Where the theme park, they're just like, hit it right around 17 seconds. So
That's
yeah.
crazy though. That's fascinating to me. I don't know what that's just is very fascinating.
It's a fun place. They're really fun people to work with too. Much less stressful than cinema. Yeah.
Is it kind of the same process though for you, like creative wise, or
Yeah.
kind of different?
Yeah, we do very similar things to film. We'll, like with a movie, you get a final cut, you'll sit down with the director and you have a spotting session where you just watch wall to wall in the film, leave little notes about where to start music, what happens for a bit, and then how you get out of a scene. Or with a theme park, you know when it starts, if it's a ride or a walkthrough, and you know when it ends. And it's still a map of events in between that you're just timing things out and you're thinking about dramatic shape. It's not just, oh, big there, small there. It's like, okay, yeah, big here, small there, but is there a story arc? We're always looking to be storytellers in both mediums. So for me, they're pretty similar. It's just a slightly different kind of experience. Yeah.
Now, I love I love the fact that you're a film composer and music is something that has always been a part of my life, music and horror movies and being a horror fan. But
Mhm.
I always find it interesting because when you're watching a movie or a horror movie, any movie in general, you'll hear a song or you'll hear something that kind of like Psycho, the showers, the music, you automatically think of certain scenes or Jaws
Yeah.
without even saying anything. It terrifies people. And I saw Jeffrey Reddick's film Don't Look Back, which
Oh yeah.
I love him. And you composed the film
Yeah.
and Haymaker. What is the process like for you composing a film and how do you kind of just tell me about it?
Yeah. Every composer has a different way of going about this. The work is ultimately the same, but how we arrive at, you know, an idea or where to go is different. And over the years, I found certain things creatively can get in my way, and certain things allow me to be very creative and inventive when I need to be. And I find that one of the first setbacks for me is if I have to read a script first. And whenever I meet a new filmmaker, this is the one really first uncomfortable conversation we have, because their first impulse is to send me a script and say, get to know everything, come to set, look around, and then start thinking of music. And for me, whenever I read I found early on that whenever I read a script, I get really into it and I begin to imagine everything. And I start to see a movie in my head. It begins to develop like a speed and a rhythm. And I see characters, you know, and I hear the score. But the problem is I don't see the same movie the filmmaker's going to see. And when they go shoot something, whatever ideas I've come up with have nothing to do with what they've created. And so I have this really uncomfortable conversation where I ask if I could either just show up to set and look around and just actually watch what they're shooting through the monitors, not really just watch the actors in the background, but really watch on the screen what it looks like. Then I know right away what kind of movie it is, like what the rhythm, what the feel is, how the characters look, how wide or tight the shots are, and all of that's really useful creative material to me. So that will answer a lot of questions. That and the first rough assembly of the film, when I can watch the whole thing, even though it's edited, you know, that the first pass of an edit is usually a little lengthy. And they still haven't really tightened up a lot of the scenes in between yet. But even then, you can still get a sense of what the movie really is. And I try not to write any music until I know exactly what the film is. So every idea that comes through my head is something I grabbed off the screen. It's like, oh, funny, there's this thing the performer always does when this subject comes up. Or like with Don't Look Back, whenever there was weird synchronicity in something, I felt like the score was missing something the whole time. And I got like 2/3 of the way through before I realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm missing a theme for a character I can't see. Every time something synchronous happens, it's like, oh, fate plays a role. We never physically see a manifestation of this, but I went back and hit all those moments with this little set of notes that sounded a little mysterious. And I realized, oh, we need a fate theme. There's Caitlin, and then there's a character that's just as important that we can't see, and their themes need to pass off back and forth, and no one's going to understand why until the very end of the film. But I just kept doing it anyway, and then it began to feel right, and Jeffrey was really responding to that. And so yeah, that's more or less the process. It's all right there on screen. Yeah.
Is that sort of a really challenging thing when there is sort of a character or something that exist, and I did the air quotes again.
Right.
But is that sort of challenging when you're doing that and you're sort of, you know, there's a character there, but you can't see the character, and you kind of have to imagine what how the character is going to be? How do you sort of put that process into motion with music?
Yeah, it's just deciding if it's important enough to follow. And in this case, it's like, even when I was watching the film, like Don't Look Back, with no music, I knew something had to happen there, but I wasn't sure what it was. And I don't know that Jeffrey was at first either. There was a scene near the end of the film where I first thought, now, wait a minute. Like, you realize this thing that we were afraid of the whole time is actually on her side. And there's this moment, when these lights start bursting in this hallway, and you realize, oh, this thing is helping her. And right then I thought, you know what? I had just horror music through that scene. I had shrieking saying, read, and the lights are bursting. I was leaning into scary, but then I thought, wait. This isn't a menacing force. This is something's helping her. And I had a chat with Jeffrey, and I was like, hey, like, you could feel free to say no. I have an idea to try something here. I think we need a sound to lighten up this moment and let the audience know, oh, this is what's been going on the whole time. And I wrote this kind of elegant, I took a break from the shrieking horror strings to have this kind of elegant, mysterious fate theme while the lights were bursting in the hallway. And we both just thought, oh, that was perfect for that moment. And then we immediately thought of 10 other spots earlier in the movie where we realized we scored it wrong. And so I went back and had to stitch together new, or I guess weave in that sound here and there through the film. So when we got to that final scene, so it was something we realized only at the very end, and realized, oh, that is important enough to go back. And every time I wove it in, the film just worked better and better. So sometimes we were just lucky, and something's just not quite right until we play around with it a bit more. Yeah.
I always find it fascinating when you're watching a movie and every once in a while it gets really loud for some reason. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, where you're just watching a movie and all of a sudden it kind of gets too loud and the sound effects or whatever's happening is just too much. I found that, for example, watching Don't Look Back, like it was just this perfect, creepy, intense amount of work that I don't think anything could have been added, but I'm not a film composer. I don't know, but to me it was amazing. Now, after you've seen a film or after you've finished your work, do you ever watch a film and then kind of go, oh, I should have added that or that? Because I do that with writing like all the time.
Yeah, same here, all of the time. Yeah. Yeah, after because film production is so intense and fast, by the time you get through it, you've just survived it. And then half a year goes by, you look back at it and you're thinking, oh gosh, it would have been so much easier if I just did that, but that's what you get after a period of reflection is 2020, everything, all your choices look a little clearer, but in the moment when no one's sure what's going on and there's this deadline that's coming fast and it won't move for you, then you just have to deal with that. But almost 100% of the time I look back and realize I would like to have moved a few things around. Yeah.
What was it like for you working on Haymaker too, and how did that process go for you?
Haymaker was surprisingly smooth. We had a much tighter deadline with Don't Look Back. And Haymaker was one of these things that they shot in really broad segments and just took a lot of time in between adding another sequence to the movie. And so I had time to sit down with Nick Sasso, the director, and we would just go over to his little editing room. It's next to his house, and just kind of zone out and just think, what could we do? We would just blue sky dream all the time. And I would just go try little things and send them sketches based on what I was seeing in the picture. And then we began to realize, as the edit was starting to come together later, there was a moment in the film that really moved both of us quite a bit. And we thought, wow, what is it about this scene that feels like just the heart of the movie? And then I have this little rule that if I tend not to score the big, showy, bold scenes first in a movie. When I actually put up picture, lock music to frames of film, I try to look for the most vulnerable, most like exposing character moment, where it's like sometimes the character doesn't even have to say anything. Like they've shown you something that's truly intimate about them, and it's often not in a big heroic moment. And I always look for that moment. It's like, who are you? Like, where's the real heart of this person or this character? And then in this case, Nick and I both agreed, well, whatever the movie leading up to this midpoint, that's where he doesn't speak at all, but this is where we see who the character is. And that's the one we chose to score first. So I always feel like if I could come up with a tune and just a general tone or sound that can work in that moment, it's easy to take a tune and make it big and heroic or romantic or sad or lots of other things. But if you can't make it work in the most quiet, vulnerable moment, and it really exposes the soul of a character, then it's no good. And so I realized that's the scene I have to get right first. And so we chose that scene. And when Nick was happy with it, then I realized, oh, I have a theme for the film now. And then I just went back to the top and just scored my way through. Yeah.
That is really amazing though, because there are so many times when you hear, because I have an entire playlist dedicated to film scores and music, and just if you, when you listen to it, you just kind of, you'll hear a scene or you'll think, oh, that happened in that movie. That was a great scene. So that's really amazing. Do you sort of see the little, like you said, the little things and about the characters and about the people? Does that sort of come to you almost in kind of like an artsy kind of way, like being an artist in general, because you are, I mean, an artist too?
Maybe. I don't know why that's what I go for. I think, composing, but especially film composing is more of a storytelling process than it is a musical process. Film music isn't music written for film, it's music in service to the picture. We're not the rock stars. We're trying to make the film the star. And if I just got swept up in what I wanted to do, all my scores would sound very different. But every time I watch through a movie, I just fall in love with the characters every time. And then I go back and I think, wow, what was it about them? Where was the moment I really felt something like a character in Haymaker, like Nomi would speak to me at some point, like, wait, where's that moment where I just did this, and I would go back and I say, why right here? What is it about it? What does she show me? What does she tell me? And once I can really figure out what it was, then I try to express it back through sound. And I don't know, maybe that's it. I just believe that story is the first thing to acknowledge. I think that should go for anybody who works in film. I mean, the writer, of course, is where the story begins. But I think near the end of the process, when it gets handed off to a composer, it's our job to honor that process. We're trying to treat a story, and I'm just one little piece of that. Yeah.
What are you working on next?
Wow. Next, I've got a couple things coming up. I try to switch things around as much as possible so I don't do too many of the same thing in a row. And I went from Don't Look Back to Haymaker to a project called Imagine Symphony, which was this bright kind of love letter to symphony orchestra, concert music film hybrid thing, to filming a masterclass in film scoring, where we were in production for several months shooting that. So I have a series on film scoring coming out soon. And after that, actually I'm starting on it now. I have a piece for guitar, a concert piece for like a symphony orchestra and solo classical guitar. So now I've shifted over to the concert stage, so just to keep it interesting. Yeah.
Where can everyone see the film school project?
The masterclass is going to have a site of its own, and at the moment we're still naming it. I think the class itself is going to be called Chasing Frames. That might change, but I think the actual course is going to be called Chasing Frames or something like that. Yeah.
Very cool. Did you have anyone that kind of inspired you professionally when you were growing up?
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. I always knew I wasn't going to be one of those John Williams or Hans Zimmer type composers. Early on I realized the composers I liked the best were the composers working for Alfred Hitchcock and Fellini, Kurosawa, and filmmakers like that. And so that left me with growing up listening to a lot of Bernard Herrmann, Nino Rota, Toru Takemitsu, and of course in new and more recent generations, that kind of weird offbeat musical spirit has been carried on by the likes of Tim Burton working with Danny Elfman. And I realized, oh, I'm not just alone in my kind of oddness as a composer. I'm just carrying this particular torch forward, from Herrmann to Elfman to hopefully myself going forward. I realized they're the ones I sympathize the most with, and their sound is what inspires me the most, I think.
What advice would you give people that might want to have a career in working with film and kind of being the storytellers for these movies and sort of they have no idea what they're getting into, what would you sort of say?
I guess my first facetious comment would be if you can be a doctor, because this life is a circus, and you have to love the circus. Like I didn't realize I would just be getting called out of bed at 3 a.m. to make fixes or to re-record things. 3 months at a time, just working 7 days a week, 14 to 18-hour days. I mean, just nonstop. You don't get to live a normal life. You might imagine what a life doing music might look like, but it's not what people think it is. It's much harsher than I think anyone would expect. I mean, it's not too different than like filmmakers. Directors live really crazy lives like that too. But I would say, like, as far as advice goes, I have several bits of advice, but one of them that I think is becoming the most important these days is there's such a strong trend in what the sound of film music is becoming. Everybody's homogenizing into one particular sound. And one of the reasons I've always loved the Hermans, the Nino Rotas, the Takamitsus, the Elfman types is they do not follow trends. Trends are poison to them. And I've always felt the same. I don't like popular trends in music, and I don't like how people conform in mass numbers into them, because what I've noticed is that the periods where I was pressured to go into that and kind of keep up and sound like the general style of whatever that time was that I was suddenly invisible. I sounded like everybody else, and I was replaceable by the next person who would work for $1 cheaper, right? And when you just refuse to sound like anybody else and just really lean into your own musical story and past and just express what's actually unique about you and your own life, then people will come to you for the sound that you have. And then you are not replaceable. Like, you're unfireable if you really have something special. And I regret having kind of fallen into it at one point early on, because I consider it one of my first setbacks as a composer. And then when I decided to cast off that way of thinking, I think that's what really saved me long term. And I noticed that's what continues to save the more independently minded composers. The ones who have something to say are the ones who last the longest. And so, especially the young composers, don't get into the trends. Fight them at all cost. Yeah.
I think the advancement in technology, do you think that sort of helps at all, or do you think that kind of hinders a person?
Both things. Because I've noticed the way technology for young composers is developing. It's developing alongside this acceleration into one sound of film music. Like, because we'll purchase these sound libraries that are like real violin sections playing every note of the violin. You can have like a long violin note I can play on like my keyboard down here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like a synthesizer that used to just hold out some tone, but it's gotten more sophisticated. It's like a real sample of the London Symphony first violins playing that note with a lot of expression in it. And then you can get long, you get short and spiccato-y quick notes, and every articulation a string instrument can do, just right at your fingertips. But I've noticed that a lot of what's being sold now is to help accelerate the sound of that mass homogenization. They're all the same loops and sounds to have that kind of epic, singular sounding film music thing. Sound libraries are now conforming into that. So what the market is offering is a shortcut into that path. So on the one hand, the mass availability of the technology should be setting many more minds free. It used to be you needed tens of thousands of dollars to get rudimentary equipment together to have a shot at doing something. But now, just for a few $100s, you can just be, off and running tomorrow if you wanted. But there's a powerful force that even with the people making the sounds are going to steer you into their little ecosystem. And my message for young composers is don't fall into it. Like there will be no, like you're already unique and special. Don't give it up just because, you know, people say your conformity will be met with demand for your talent, and you'll be rewarded with acceptance. You know, none of those things are true. Only when you fight the trend can you continue moving forward. Yeah.
You think that's one of the biggest challenges, to kind of always be unique, but also kind of stay true to yourself as a composer?
I think it's one of the same. I think to embrace your uniqueness is just that. That is, you know, being true to yourself is your unique sound. To not be true to oneself is to adopt somebody else's sound. And yeah.
What types of challenges do you face when you're creating music and doing all of this for films?
Challenges. Just in general, like just like what sort of things come up during the scoring process?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, every film composer probably shares this. The first one, this first is probably the most important one. It's just, you know, creative time is different. Like, I guess to be creative on a creative schedule is one thing, but to be creative on a production schedule is a very different thing. I'll just put it that way. When you sign on to do something, you sign on to do it within the time they need it done. And I've dropped into films where I really wanted to be a part of it. And then, you know, as I'm signing in and we're starting it's a little, sometimes it's a bit of the schedule's a nebulous blob for a little while, and then it begins to conform as you're starting in on it, and you realize, oh, I was pretty sure we had like 7 to 9 weeks to work on this. Now it's 6, and I have 70 minutes of score to write and record during that last week. So now I have 5 composing weeks. And that means I'm going to be writing something like 5 minutes of music a day, maybe up to 7. And you're just like, okay, well, so much for really getting to deliberate on the music behind this movie. I just need to get it done. It's just about at that point, it's just about speed, and everyone just kind of gets what they get. Now and again, it's like, oh, we have 3 months to write almost 80 minutes of music. And that trims down what I have to do every day to keep up. So that's one thing. And then, you know, whenever picture shifts around, it's just a disaster for music. You know, an editor might say, oh, we just trimmed a few frames here and there. But when something cuts right in the middle of a big soaring hero theme, it just cuts right in the middle. Well, you know, that disruption isn't something you can shift slightly. That cut represents this infection that has to spread in 2 different directions. You have to conform everything before it and everything after it and adjust around it. And so, and it might just mean writing a whole new track to that whole scene, just to help ease into make that moment more natural around the new edit. And it can happen. And I've had that happen where I'm in the middle of a 4.5-minute action sequence after 18 straight hours of just slamming away to get it done by the next morning. Somewhere, just as I'm emailing it off at 2 a.m., a new edit comes in. Like, oh, sorry, we meant to mention we trimmed several things around, and it's like, oh, it's okay. It's just a few little trims. And then, you know, I drop it in my session and look, and it's like, no, that's like at least 2 of those 4.5 minutes have to be rescored, and there's no way they're going to get it the next morning. And if it has to be in, they're just going to get what they're going to get. And it's just little things like that could be crazy making and a little scary. Yeah.
I don't know how much you can reveal about the masterclass, but do you think, will you be talking about stuff like that, like big different things and how you get everything kind of together with composing?
How to survive it and withstand it. Yeah, there's near the end, I have a couple lessons on creativity and then business and what it means to live this sort of life and dispel what people think it may or may not be. I didn't want to sell something that you see these courses online. It's like how to get rich fast making movies. That's quite a promise you're making there. It's like, no, no, no. Mine is, here's the hard, painful, time and study intensive way. Like, I'm not telling you there's any easy way to do anything, because there's not. It's just a brutally honest assessment about what it takes technically and creatively to do this, and what it means in your day-to-day life. And if it scares a lot of people off, then that's good too. It's worth people realizing, oh, you know what? It doesn't mean that much to me. I'm fine letting that go. And I didn't get to find out that way. I got to find out getting pulled into a TV show and trying to withstand the weekly schedule and watching people just falling off all around me and realizing, oh, I think I'm somebody who likes this kind of punishment. Like, I didn't realize I was one of those crazy people who could work for 48 straight hours and just whip on an orchestra in a studio and just come out of it feeling excited about it. I really didn't know I was that person until I was there. And people who, I went to school with, or, around me, who I thought were much stronger, more confident, sure of themselves, talented, just couldn't withstand that life. And they all just fell away, and the cheese stands alone. So I realized, oh, I guess I'm somebody who can do this. and I teach a little bit about that too. It's like, get ready for how hard it will be on your life personally. Yeah.
I love learning about the aspects of how films are made and how things happen. And I always think it's interesting, because when you watch a movie, you don't really know everything that goes into it, like what the director does, the producers, the writers, the film composers. I don't think people always realize that there's a very long process for all of that stuff.
Well, gosh, from when a script is written and a film gets greenlit, to pre-production, to a long production process, editing, and then sound, music, effects at the very, very end. As composers come in, technically, even if I get a whole 3 months to write a feature score, which anymore is just unheard of. Like, that's a luxury. I can finish around 7 or 8 p.m. every day if I have 3 months to score a film. That's like vacation life right there for me. If I'm done at 8 o'clock at night, then that's nothing. We come in at the last minute, and it's a scary moment for a filmmaker, because they've been living with this movie for a year to a year and a half by the time a composer gets there. And we're not exactly part of the process the whole time. And often, as they're cutting the film, they're adding all that temp music from other people's movies to sort of kind of watch the film with the editor and get a sense for the rhythm in the scenes and all that, and where they want music to emphasize thing. And one of the hardest things I've noticed for filmmakers is when I come in, they've gotten so married to that temp music, something we call temp love, where it's almost terrifying when we take it out. And then I just come in, wreck the whole thing with a brand new score. And quite often it doesn't go that well for a while. You go through this really scary process where you have to lead them out of the temp music they were using and introduce this whole new thing. Luckily with Haymaker and Don't Look Back, they were so open-minded about temp. And with Jeffrey on Don't Look Back, this was a dream come true for me. He just hates temp music so much. There was nothing that felt right for his movie because it didn't belong in his movie. And he just couldn't wait to be rid of it. And then he seemed so relieved when new score was started coming in. Even if I didn't quite get the scene right the first time, he was still just like, oh, thank God, this actually sounds like it belongs in my movie. Let's shape it a little more. Here's what we should follow through the scene this time. And he would guide me to a better way through a scene. But that took a lot of heat off me, because often you spend a little bit too much time weaning them away from what they've gotten used to for the last year of hearing in their film. So it's a long time before we show up. Yeah.
Does your process get different, kind of like the genre of films you're doing, like a horror movie versus an action movie? does that creative process kind of change, or do you kind of go into a different mode?
Yeah, the process is always the same. It's just more like what's different every time is I try to do a psychological shift to put myself in the world of that film. I try to think like a movie, and I don't know if that makes any sense though. It's like it's almost like I'm walking around this room. I'm like acting stuff out that I see on picture, and I'm like singing things out loud, and I'll play it up on the screen. And I kind of mimic and baby talk music, and I get like I have to get up and move and get very physical to like score a scene. And it's like I'm trying to get into that space. Like if I were in that world right now, what's the vibe? What's going through my head if I were part of this conversation? Sometimes I was there, like I'm on set and I'm like watching and I see the cut. I'm like, okay, I want to capture a little bit of that dynamic I was feeling live when we were all on the set together. And so it's more like I try to frame myself differently every time, but the process for scoring the film is always the same, except for action and comedy, but especially animated comedies. Those I'm just full of dread every time I start because they're so much more difficult to score. Um, because with movies like that, the edit is just chop 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 chop. It's just moving along, and especially with comedy, you have to just hit every little physical thing and every funny little nuance in people speaking, and you're timing it to picture. It's just this bonkers process. And I'll work 14 hours and I'm just tracking stuff in. I'm getting all the timings right. Then I go back to the start, hit play, and 40 seconds went by. I'm thinking, oh man, there's 2.5 minutes left. Like, oh my God. It's like there's so much. And so for like those two genres, it's more like I'm mostly just trying to like psychologically prepare myself for how exhausting they're going to be. But that's the only difference, really. So
Yeah, that's crazy though when you think about kind of the different genres, and like I'm thinking about some movies, and it definitely seems like for comedy and stuff that would be a little challenging. I don't know.
you just have to hit everything. I mean, just go back and watch like a Warner Brothers cartoon or a Pixar
Hmm.
film, even, it's like just if you follow the score, it's just riding up and down with everything in the scene. You have to simply acknowledge everything, because like comedy and action are so physically driven. There's not a whole lot of space where you're like really probing like really deeper, unspoken, unseen qualities in a character. You're not going too deep into their heads, except for a few moments that we make space for a little development in those ways. Most of the time it's either action, action, explosion, explosion, then looking for clues before the next set of explosions, then maybe a character moment. But really, there's no time to think too hard. You just have to play this like musical onomatopoeia game where you're trying to sound like what you see. And that stuff is exhausting. It's fun to do. I've done a lot of comedy over the years, but that's why I know that there's a world of difference in scoring those versus anything else. I mean, action comedy is just spotting intensive. You're just hitting everything with music. Yeah.
What do you want to say to the fans of film composing and just in general? What do you kind of want them to know from your perspective?
That there's so much great music going on out there. It's not all just Hans Zimmer or John Williams. There's a big world full of interesting creatives that are worth exploring, especially to younger composers out there, is to dig a little deeper than the people who dominate all the headlines right now. That's not what all of music is. And especially if you're going to go into this business, don't feel like you have to be those people, especially. But really, it's such a deeper world than I think most people realize. It's like listening to music. If you were to only select albums to listen to based on what you see at the Grammys, all we would ever be listening to is Taylor and Beyonce, except for the fact that there's 100 other great categories in the Grammy. Some of my favorites are like immersive or gospel or things like that, where there's so much ingenuity and interest going on. They're just not the big sellers, you know. I mean, you can albums can win Grammys that have maybe only had hundreds to only thousands of sales. You know, it's just the music stands for something bigger, and there's just so much. And I think most people miss out on where the good stuff really is.
I think sometimes, especially in the horror world, at least, there's a lot of people that don't get the credit, and they don't sort of get the attention, I guess would be the easiest way to say it. But it's sort of, it's not easy, I don't think, for some people to kind of, I don't even know where I'm going with this question, but it's difficult. But what I want to say is, I think sometimes with the horror, like in horror and even in music, like I'm listening to, like right now, to Mr. Bungle and The Locust, and you know, I love Mariah Carey and all these different artists, and like it's a variety. Like I think sometimes my Spotify list is like, what are you doing? Like we don't even know what to let you play. But I do think sometimes that artists don't get enough credit. Like there's so many people out there that are so talented, and everybody's just focused on, like you said, Taylor Swift and Beyonce, and I like Beyonce.
Sure.
But there's so many artists, and it's like film composing when you're listening to certain people, and I'll bring up somebody at random, and people look at me like, who? I don't even know who you're talking about. But it's just amazing to me with like what you create, and I just think that's incredible.
Oh, thank you.
That was
I
a
hope it sounds good.
total rambling mess, but
No, your point translates though. I
yeah,
mean, I think we're thinking the same thing about that. Yeah.
the basic point of what I just should have said is that artists don't get enough credit. Like artists who have been around and creating this amazing work, and you know, it kind of sucks in a way.
Yeah, in a way, yes, but in another way, we live to create whether or not people even care. And I've just never really cared. And but I'm lucky that I've fallen into stuff where people tend to watch it or hear it. But it wouldn't have stopped me either way, you know. So, and there's a lot of other people like that out there who live for, you know, their authenticity in their music or their art. You know, it's not about whether people get it or really understand or even like it. It's more that there is a community of people who will understand them, and we're often just trying to reach them. Reach a lot more people, then that's nice too, but it's really more about finding who's listening with us, I think. Yeah.
Well, you've answered all my questions, and it was an honor to talk to you. I just think you're so talented, and I can't wait to see the master class and to just check everything else out. And I thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me, and sorry you had to listen to me ramble sometimes.
No, sometimes it's just how we like process through stuff and just explore some thoughts. So no, that's great. It's been really nice talking to you. It's been fun to revisit a lot of these, revisit these movies and the process behind them. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you, do you think you'll ever write a book? Do you think you would ever consider that?
I am actually starting one right now. I was asked to write one about theme park scoring, and so I'm actually getting into that. It might be a couple actually. Yeah, and I might even shoot another class just about that too. So yeah, believe it or not. Is there a particular book you would find interesting? That's that. Now I'm sort of curious why you would think to ask that.
Because I was thinking about when you were talking about the process of film scoring, and when you were talking about how you kind of see things, and when I write sometimes, like not just for like interviews or reviews or articles, but
Mhm.
my own writing for stories. I often see things in my head and I think,
Mm.
should I write that? Because it might help somebody. And then I think about it for a while and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to write it because I think
Huh.
it might actually help somebody. And when I thought about that and when I think about film composing to me, just
Yeah.
probably because I love music so much in general, whether it's, I don't even care like what genre, what it is. I love it. And I always found those books fascinating, like to kind of see what you would have to say about things and what you would write about and kind of how you would explain your process. And I think
Mm.
the wheels are just always going in my head.
So you mean actually just do some more like creative storytelling writing, not just write about, not so the answer of, oh, I was actually asked to write a book about how to score for theme parks. That's not what you meant. That's not what you're wondering. It's more like what kind of if I were to write a set of short stories, like what would they be?
Maybe a little bit of that too, but also kind of like,
Hmm.
about the parks and to find out
Hmm.
what you do and what you think when you're writing, when you're looking at a film and you're composing and you're seeing this stuff,
Yeah.
kind of like
Huh.
that.
Interesting. I've never really considered that. That might be fun. I may have to add that to the queue of outside
Do
of
list.
music writing projects. Yeah. I'll see how the instructive book about theme park music goes, and if I should ever try something like that again.
That's fascinating though, that I would read that, the instructive theme park. I think it's fascinating.
Luckily, it'll be short. It won't be anything too big. Well, because we might do a series of them. So I'm trying to just do some shorter, easy reads at this point. I'm just reconstructing the big idea and trying to figure out how many pieces I could chop it into meaningfully without being too brief or not running on too long. So yeah, so that's new territory for me. I could do it with a symphony, uh, just a book. That's scary to me. So.
Well, I thank you so much, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And it was an honor to talk to you. And you're so talented. So thank you so, so much.
Well, thank you. Well, it was so nice to get to meet you and chat with you today.
Thank you very much, Chris. And it was nice to meet you too
All right. Well,
via
you take
Zoom.
care.
You too. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.